we get into the formal history assignments for the day, I'd like to bring to your attention an article I saw in the Union Tribune this weekend, which basically said, why can't we all be purple? No, it wasn't a report on Alice Walker, The Color of Purple. It was an evaluation of the red states and the blue states and why the United States is now so divided. Divided almost to the point where we're uncivil, depending on which side you live in. In reality, we've always been. And I'd like to take you back on a historic adventure to realize that social change, political change, economic change, human change takes a long time. And if we can get that idea, perhaps we can be a little less impatient with each other when we differ on a particular point, and a little more encouraging in the long run to find that, yes, we're all human beings underneath. So with that in mind, let's go back to the Founding Fathers. Now, in the beginning of the United States, I don't want to go back that far, we had two men of very different background and very different perspective, both of whom we count as Founding Fathers. Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton, coming from a commercial background, going to the state of New York and founding banking commercial interests there, and of course, eventually becoming the nation's first official banker, Secretary of the Treasury. Jefferson, a landed aristocrat from Virginia, widely read, highly respected, and very humane. Now, at that time, there was very little that the two agreed upon. After all, Hamilton thought we should have had a monarchy. Jefferson thought the real wisdom of the nation resided in the crossroads store. Hamilton was afraid of what he called king mob, meaning ordinary people. It's very easy at the beginning of the 21st century to realize that in the beginning of this country, of, by, and for the people meant of, by, and for one white man in 17, because the requirements to participate in government were so stringent as to include not only property owned, but a bank account as well. Now, with that in mind, how did we get to the point where all of us now are encouraged to participate, whether we do or not? Well, the good thing about this last election is we got more out than usual. Unfortunately, our more is less in terms of percentage than any other democratic nation in the West. Be that as it may, let's take a look at the interests that divided the country then and how they came through. Before I do that, let me just highlight the voting. It took 50 years to get every white man a vote. Andrew Jackson. It took another 40 years and a civil war to get black men to vote, and then they were systematically denied it in a variety of ways we won't go into it this time. It took another 60 years to get women to vote, and it took another 40 years to get the 18-year-olds to vote, even though they had been the bulk of our soldiers all the time. So now, we have a nation in which all of the adults, theoretically, can participate. So that means of, by, and for the people now has a different meaning. What does it? Aren't there still attitudes out there that say some are born to rule and many are born to follow? You say no. Well, think about it for a moment. John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson represented again the civilized, urbane aristocracy of New England. And Jackson, the rough and ready entrepreneurs on the land of the Southwest. Jackson is the one who brought the mob to the White House, mud on their boots and all. He thought it was fine. Most of those who'd been involved before that thought it was a disgrace. Change is slow. Certainly the events leading up to the Civil War didn't happen one time. But the fact is, the South was still agricultural. pace while the North was becoming increasingly industrialized. In fact, many would argue that's the reason the North was able to conquer the South. Tremendous industry. You say, what does that have to do with attitudes? A great deal. Because the industries began to concentrate wealth at the top. Far more than just landed aristocracy, we now had concentrated wealth in commons. And those two became antagonistic. Throughout the last part of the 1800s, we filled in the nation. Now, at that point, all ranges of Americans thought they were doing the right thing. They were, after all, following manifest destiny. We were together somewhat in our idea of conquering the Wild West. Did we accord equality, consideration, democratic principles to the native people? No. We're still settling those accounts today. So we've been, as a group, a bit unwilling to accord to our opponents at any stage in our history the same rights we reserve for ourselves. Now that applies when we oppose each other and when we find ourselves opposing other peoples, other cultures, other races and religions. Now, World War I gave us another divide. It produced the regular income tax. We tried a little bit of it at the Civil War, but now it became a permanent fixture. Two types of taxes. The government will always collect one or the other or both. One is a progressive income tax, meaning that you increase the amount of tax as the income increases. In a way, you might say, in recognition of the fact that that person is profiting from the culture or the society more than others. So they would have more surplus or more optional money with which to support the system. The other is a regressive tax, and it's on consumption. We all have to consume. If we all pay the same amount of tax on consumption, it's regarded as a regressive tax because it hits most heavily on those least able to pay. You can see where that could lead to some political division. You can see where the tax issue over time probably would lead to a situation where in 1920 we have Calvin Coolidge saying the business of government is business, followed by FDR, with Hoover in between, and FDR saying we, the people, must be able to stand up. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. We're all in this together. FDR's reward, by the way, was to be regarded as a traitor to his class. After all, the man was a multimillionaire who lived in a great mansion on the Hudson River. How could he possibly take the part of impoverished, 25% of the population was unemployed at that time, people at the bottom? Well, the fact is, he had Jeffersonian ideas. Coolidge understood Hamilton. All the way back to there. Finally, we get to the fact that following FDR's dominance, the Democrats have controlled Congress, or had controlled Congress, for a rather long period of time. The last stretch was some 40 years. Those who are out of power want to get into power. In this case, Newt Gingrich figured a way to do it. And he rode a double-headed horse. One was the traditional